you have two human beings at the start of history, the sort of conceptual, logical, philosophical start of history for Kojève. We're trying to understand how did we get to where we are now, where in principle we can recognize each other's infinite human dignity and worth in principle. Okay, we can do that now, but how did we get to this stage if we have to give an account of the history? Now, how do we get to the stage in a conceptual or logical history? When he traces it back to the first stage, this is the way you get the argument in Kojève's retelling of Hegel. You have two human beings, two individuals, encountering one another, each of them wanting to be recognized by the other as the bearer, exclusive bearer of dignity and worth. Okay, so there's no mutual recognition yet, because again, we haven't gone through the process. So each one wants to be recognized by the other as the exclusive bearer of dignity. Now, they're risking their lives, their animal lives, their natural lives, their bodily lives. Okay, they're risking their lives in a fight to the death for recognition. The fact that they're willing to fight to the death, the fact that they're willing to put their animal existence or natural existence or given existence on the line in desiring recognition shows that they're more than just an animal being. So each of them has this claim to be more, to have some specific human dignity, but wants to be the exclusive bearer of that dignity. And you now have their confrontation. By the way, you might say, well, animals fight over resources. Does that make animals human if animals willing to sacrifice its life or something like that? The way that Kojève tells it is that an animal, for example, will fight for something that is given, like water, resources of whatever kind. Whereas when the two first individuals or human beings fight for recognition, they're desiring something that doesn't exist. They're desiring the recognition of the other, or they're desiring the desire of the other. So the way he says it is that the human being is a desire for something that doesn't exist. And that only comes into being through work and struggle. And in that is unlike the animals, which don't desire what doesn't exist. Okay. So the two individuals confront one another, each wanting the claim to be the exclusive bearer of dignity. And now they're fighting to the death for recognition. What happens? They fight, both die. Well, you can't get to the next phase when they're both dead because the corpses aren't going to recognize one another. That gets you nowhere. The bloody fight to the death where both die is just a dead end. Okay, it doesn't go anywhere. Well, what about in the case where one of them dies? This one dies, or this one dies. No recognition. Once again, right? The corpse is not going to recognize the master or the person who wants to be recognized as such. Can't happen. So if one of them dies, no history. If both of them die, no history, no movement, no progress. So what happens? What happens is that, according to Hegel and Kojève's retelling of Hegel, is that at some point you have an underivable, spontaneous, and free recoil or recursion back to the natural out of a fear of death and desire for life on the basis of one of these two. So they put themselves on the line. They transcended, in that sense, their animal existence. They were ready to die for the desire for recognition. And then one of them freely goes back and provides the other one what he wanted. Let's say this one recognizes this one. Okay, fine. You are the exclusive bearer of dignity. This constitutes, for the first time in our history, a new phase, a phase that is now stratified between master, the one who was recognized, and slave, the one who gave the recognition. Master and slave are not natural categories, like for Aristotle and Kojève's analysis of this question. Rather, they're historical categories. They're historically constituted in a sort of logical or conceptual history in this free, spontaneous moment of freely given recognition. But now that you have a master and a slave, Kojève says, the master is not satisfied. He didn't get what he wanted, because just like he can't be recognized by a corpse, he didn't want the recognition of a slave. He wanted to be recognized by somebody worthy of granting him that recognition. He didn't realize that the only thing that would happen is that he would be recognized by what ends up being a slave in this, like I said, logical conceptual history. So the master is not satisfied. He didn't get what he wanted. Okay, he is basically in this impasse. Well, from the slave's point of view, the slave is doing what the master commands him to do. Build me this, build me that, fetch me this, fetch me that, do this work and that work. And in a nutshell, in Hegel's version and Kojève's retelling of Hegel, the slave in working transforms the natural world through his labor. And in transforming the natural world through his labor, comes to realize that he's not natural through and through, that he's free with respect to nature, that he transcends it through his work, through his labor. That's a new insight, a newly gained recognition or shape of self-consciousness. And what Kojève and Hegel argue ultimately is that this recognition gives rise to another type of configuration of self-consciousness and of the person with respect to the world. And it gets a motor going, the motor of progress, the motor of history. Remember, history begins with the struggle. No struggle, no history. But the struggle has to end in this free recognition. And then labor, no history. No slave labor, no history, no progress. No work, no progress. And this whole process unfolds to a point where everybody can gain the recognition that they desire through universal recognition. So if you remember what I had read you and what Kojève said in On Tyranny, he says Xenophon is trying to show us that Hiero can't be satisfied. He's not satisfied, right? As the master, the tyrant, over a slave, he doesn't get what he wanted. His desire for recognition is not satisfied. But Hegel showed us that in principle, the satisfaction is possible only in a universal and classless society. Homogeneous, classless, universal society. Hopefully that gave you some insight into how Kojève and Hegel are arguing this point.